Welcome to the Probate Nation. My name is Richard Ruddy. Whether you're caring for an elderly loved one as a court-appointed conservator or guardian, or as an agent named an advanced medical directive or financial power of attorney, or just helping out without any of those authorities, your primary goal in each instance is to provide your loved one with the best possible care as they age. Often that care involves paying for caregivers in their home, or it may involve paying for that care in an assisted living facility or nursing home. Getting good care for your loved one is important. Paying for it is often the challenge. If your loved one does not have long-term care insurance, and many folks do not, then you may have to seek assistance from the federal government program called Medicaid. There are many facets of Medicaid, and each state handles this federal program a bit differently. Our show tonight will focus on adult long-term care Medicaid in Virginia. And our guests are two Virginia attorneys who handle long-term care Medicaid planning and applications for Virginia adults. They will serve as our guides as we explore this long-term care financing option for all who may be traveling on the Virginia Living Probate train. Our first guest has been practicing law for 30 years, first with the Legal Services of Northern Virginia, and for the last 13 years in private practice in Arlington. He focuses his practice on elder law, special needs law, and estate planning. He taught an elder law course at American University Law School for 10 years and has served on the board of the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys and is a past president of the Virginia chapter of NAIL as well. He presently chairs, along with our second guest, the elder law section of the Arlington County Bar Association. Our second guest has been in private law practice in McLean since 2009, specializing in estate planning, guardianships, and elder law. Prior to law school, she worked in local assisted living communities for 8 years. She is also active in the Virginia Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and currently serves as a member of its board of directors, vice president, and co-chair of programs. Please welcome attorneys Ed Zetlin and Angela Griffith. Well, that was a mouthful. You guys have done a lot.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you guys for coming by and talking with us. Well, this is a super complicated topic area, and so I don't want anybody to come away from this program thinking they know what they should do. I want to emphasize that for our audience, and I know we know that among ourselves.
Right.
So Ed, let's begin with how do aging adults pay for long-term care costs, whether it's going to be delivered in the home or in a nursing home? What are some of the resources they can turn to?
Well, certainly private pay is the first option, but there is also long-term care insurance, as you mentioned earlier. Sometimes there's caps on that as well, though. So in addition to the private pay, long-term care insurance, sometimes people have to apply for Medicaid, which is a means-tested program. But in Virginia, luckily, we have the option of having at-home Medicaid as well as Medicaid in a nursing facility. So there are a couple options. As far as how someone comes up with private pay, pensions, savings, but also some of our applicants are eligible for veterans benefits, which is something that's also important to understand. That's
good to understand. Ed, how about yourself? What does Medicaid pay for assisted living, for instance?
In Virginia, Medicaid does not pay for assisted living.
Okay.
Now, there is a program called auxiliary grants that is paid through the Department of Medical Assistance Services that for low-income individuals, it will provide a minimum payment in some assisted livings. The problem with that is it's a low payment, and not every assisted living accepts auxiliary grants in Virginia.
Okay.
And so that's one of the problems with regard to it. As a general rule, though, don't think of Medicaid as a source of paying for long-term care in assisted living in Virginia.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So in connection with that, Angela, are there qualification criteria in order to receive Medicaid coverage for these adult care programs? There's a certain incomes you have to not have, or certain assets you got to be below in order to...
Right, and as I was mentioning, it's a means-tested program, which means they're going to look at the income, the assets, but also they're going to look at to make sure that you actually meet the medical needs necessary for someone to qualify for the equivalent of nursing home care.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have some activities of daily living is kind of the term, bathing assistance, dressing assistance, medication administration, or someone with a cognitive impairment that kind of needs that 24-hour supervision. That's kind of one of the main things. So it's a medical test and a financial test that they're looking at for someone to go in under nursing home or at-home Medicaid.
Okay. Well, we're going to come back and talk more about the money part, but I think we'll learn the money part is just really an initial barrier that there's ways to work around that sometimes as well. Ed, let's talk about Medicaid. It is a federal program, but are there differences that occur at the state level that people need to make sure they're aware of?
Yeah, so think of Medicaid as a federal state program. Usually the feds pay money to the state depending upon how much the state is paying. States vary. Where they might differ is they might differ in some of the basic resource allowances. They differ. In some of the exemptions to property, they might differ to a certain extent from state to state. But they all apply the general rules that we know with regard to transfer issues, to married couples are treated differently than a single individual. So there's certain aspects that we know are going to be the same in each state. But for some of the details, resource issues, you're probably going to need local counsel for that particular jurisdiction to know what are the fine details.
And I think it's important to emphasize for our audience tonight that the focus of this program is on Virginia.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
you folks have, that's your experience and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're
Right.
not talking about DC or Maryland, which will have its own little set of wrinkles.
Right.
So, as you talk about, are there different qualification rules for a single person versus a married person?
There are, and it also depends on whether they are living at home or in a nursing facility. In Virginia, you do not have to have the what we call healthy spouse paying towards the person that is receiving Medicaid. Their income is not considered something that they have to look at. But with married couples, they look at them as a unit. So whether it's the husband's assets or the wife's assets, how they're titled, they look at them all together. Whereas you have a single person, they just look at your main income and assets. For an individual, you cannot have more than $2,000 in countable assets, is what we call it. You can keep more as a spouse, and that is something that's important because a lot of people think the people in the couple have to spend down to a minimal amount to have someone qualified for Medicaid. But there are avenues to keep some money for the spouse.
Okay, and we're going to come back to that. But if you are eligible for Medicaid and you're receiving payments, are those payments made directly to the provider, or do they reimburse the family?
They are reimbursed to the provider.
To go directly to the provider.
Right.
Okay, so that's good to know. Well, Angela, let's keep talking. Medicaid home eligibility.
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of people want to stay at home. That's the big
And it's
thing.
a great option in Virginia, yes.
What does Medicaid cover for services to be delivered in the home?
Well, it's never going to be 24-hour care. So depending upon the assessment that's done by the county, they can determine how many hours that person needs. Again, that person would have help with showering, bathing, dressing, toileting. It might just be kind of getting up in the morning, helping them to get a small breakfast going, and then maybe need something later on in the afternoon. A lot of times when somebody is at home, they have somebody else that's a caregiver that maybe is working, but also gives the caregiver some respite if they need to run errands, grocery store, that type of thing. So the at-home care is also something that can live at home safely, but a lot of times it's with somebody else that's going to be providing some care when the Medicaid aid is not there.
What are the basic eligibility requirements in order to be eligible for that particular program at home?
Well, at home, again, the county nurse or social worker is going to go out to make sure that the person can live safely at home providing these services.
Okay.
Although they would allow Medicaid at home, they also have to make sure they're going to be safe. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to have caregiver burnout, so you have to make sure that the caregiver is also going to be able to provide that care.
Okay.
So one of the things that they look at is, yes, they will also look at the assets of the income of the person. and make sure that, because there's money that still has to go from that Medicaid recipient to the care providers, that they can still live at home within a financial amount that they're going to have.
Okay. Well, Ed, let's talk a little bit about Medicaid and the nursing home eligibility.
Okay.
What does Medicaid cover for services to be delivered in a nursing home?
Well, you know, Medicaid rules, they can't discriminate in terms of the services between a private pay and a nursing home eligible person. There are federal laws with regard to the discrimination. So they basically are going to provide the same services.
Okay.
Nursing care, prescription care, all of the services that anyone else would get into that would get into a nursing home. So in that sense, there really shouldn't be any different. There really, once the person pays their co-payment based upon their income, they're going to be covered just like anybody else in a nursing home.
And how about are there any differences in the eligibility requirements for coverage in the nursing home?
Well, in the community-based care program, the person who's living at home gets to keep more of their income because they're living at home and they have more of an income need to maintain themselves at home.
Okay.
In the nursing home, they're going to only be able to keep a very minimal amount of income for their personal needs.
Okay.
Okay, and then depending upon whether they have a spouse and a spouse that has their own income shortage, their own income is going to be payable less certain deductions to the nursing home.
Okay. So I know we talked a little bit, and we've talked in the questions you've answered so far, both of you talked about the different type of income limitations you can have, whether you're single or married. And so I know that does change from year to year, and there's ways to deal with that. So I don't want to overwork that too much. But I think one of the big problems a lot of times is the actual assets themselves.
Right.
You look at somebody's balance sheet. Ed,
Right.
talk a little bit about, are all assets counted in determining eligibility for Medicaid?
So I usually think of these in two categories. There are countable assets, and then there are exempt assets. So there are exempt assets that people need to know about, and those can differ also with respect to whether we're talking about a single individual or a couple. So there are specific rules that apply when one member of a married couple needs coverage under long-term care. There's a set of rules that apply for that couple, even though one person is needing the long-term care, as opposed to a single individual. So we might want to talk a little about that.
Okay. So and do we find as an aside that if we have a married couple that they decide to get divorced in order to become single, so they get the rules work more favorably?
I would only do that in an extreme kind of situation. Okay, it does happen, but you really want to see is that really the best option for them? Typically, it's not going to be the best option because we can use the rules basically of one spouse, who we call a community spouse. We can use the rules to provide a basis of resource protection in the long term for that community spouse.
Well, that's important, and the reason I asked that question because I think our audience would begin to think, well, maybe I should do that. If I'm married, somehow I can use that as a simple strategy, which may actually be more trouble than you think. Well, and let's talk about qualification pitfalls, because I guess that's one of the things we've run into. What are some of the common pitfalls that applicants run into in meeting both the income requirements and the asset requirements? I know they've kind of run together.
Right. Some of the pitfalls are someone will think, well, I'll just give all my assets to my children. And that way I have meet the restrictions for my assets. The problem with that is that Medicaid has a 5-year look back from the point of eligibility. Correct. And so a lot of people will think, well, I will just give the money to my kids or deed my house over to someone. The problem with that, when you're otherwise eligible for Medicaid and you're down to the required amount, which in 2019 is $2,000 in countable assets, not exempt ones, as Ed mentioned, then with the $2,000, if you say, oh, when I apply, I only have $2,000, but I gave away $200,000, well, then Medicaid will create a period of what we call ineligibility, where someone's going to have to pay for that penalty period, is what we call, for the person's care, because they would think otherwise, but for that $200,000 you gave away, you could have providing care privately, paying for that. So you have to be really careful with just giving money away as a protection, and the other thing is to really know what's considered exempt assets and what's not. You don't want to just give away something if it's exempt just because you think it's going to be a problem for Medicaid.
So it's very important to be able to sit down. I mean, I think what I'm hearing though is, we can organize a balance sheet. Most people can do that pretty successfully, but that actually becomes kind of complicated when we begin to kind of dig into the rules about what goes into the exempt category and what goes into the accountable category.
Yes.
And then once you get through that step, of course, then you can begin to figure out what plannings might work on the right circumstances. Are there tested and accepted strategies to meet both, in order to position yourself to meet both the income and asset requirements?
Well, it's harder to meet the income because you can't just say, stop my Social Security, because then they would be considered, well, you're giving money back to Social Security as a gift, so you can't be doing that. It's harder to stop income sources, but for exempt assets, as Ed mentioned before, there are different rules if you have a spouse and if you're a single person. So with the exemption, there's a certain amount that a spouse can keep. Anything above that, you can do some strategizing to make sure that the person that's going to be living in the community, your healthy spouse, still has money so that they're not becoming destitute in the process as well, because it's very possible they will need care in the future as well.
So it's important for people to understand that the rules as far and the strategies will differ, but whether you're single or married. How you approach that.
And when we say gifting, we don't want to scare people and say I can't give birthday gifts to my grandchildren and things like that. Well, unless they're giving a lot to them, but it's a combination of things, and that the Medicaid work is going to be looking at.
Okay, and let's turn to the application process itself. We have this set of blocks lined up on the table. We now have to transform those blocks down on paper so that someone can appropriately evaluate whether or not we check all the correct boxes and can qualify. So talk a little bit about what's involved with an application for Virginia Medicaid coverage, whether you're at home or whether you're in a nursing home. Just give us a thumbnail overview.
Well, my advice is now is to, even though DMAS provides his online applications, for long-term care, that's probably not the way to go. You're going to probably need to print out those forms and complete those forms. And you're going to be asked to apply, or you're going to be asked, someone might be applying for another person, and there's some rules about how that person can designate you to apply for them on the form. But it's a combination of filling out the application and then providing all of the other detailed information. And they're actually going to want to see bank statements. They're going to want to see statements actually showing your income from the income source itself. Mm-hmm. They're not going to just take your word for it. They're not even going to verify your income simply by looking at the bank statement. They're going to want a statement from the pension provider. So all those kinds of, all of your assets, your life insurance, whatever cash value you might have in your life insurance, the value of your house, even though the house is going to be an exempt asset if the spouse is living in it, they're still going to want to see that. So there is a great deal of paper trail that they're all going to want with regard to the application process.
So before we move to the next topic area, though, tell me what are some of the common red flags that come up on Medicaid applications that, in your pre-review before you submit them, these are red flags you say, well, this is going to be a problem. So we always want to identify those before we submit the application.
I will ask them, have either spouse, for instance, made any transfer above a certain amount within the last 5 years? If there is, then we're going to need to deal with that particular situation.
Okay, so that's right out of the box. That's probably the biggest one that people run into.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Let's talk about because we're running. We have so much to cover still. Angie, talk a little bit about common mistakes that people make? You know, what are some of the common mistakes people make in the whole application process that sometimes can't be fixed?
Well, not keeping proper receipts for things, especially if they are having a caregiver and they're directly writing checks to them without giving a receipt to show that it's not something that they give a gift, but it was a reimbursement for something. Also, as Ed mentioned, failure to provide documentation. Although we don't necessarily keep things around for 5 years, bank statements are really important, deeds, those types of things, but the pitfalls are really not having the adequate documentation to show, no, it wasn't a gift, it was a reimbursement for something. The other thing is that when you have a spouse that's in a Medicaid applying for Medicaid, even though they didn't give the gift, if their spouse did, that's still going to be something that's going to be had to consider.
Interesting.
It is.
That's good to know.
Yes, and so when you're paying for other people's rent, things like that, that's considered a gift as well if it's not for the use of the Medicaid applicant and their spouse. So that's really important, and sometimes families can pay the money back, what we consider curing the gift, but that's not always possible.
I was going to ask you if there's ways to fix that, but would you allow a nursing home to complete a application for Medicaid for someone that's at the nursing home?
Well, you know, our nursing homes have a lot of people that they're working with, so it depends on how well versed they are. They're not going to be able to counsel you on what you can and can't keep. They basically can tell you what the rules are. If they just say to apply and the person has more than the allowed amount, it's automatically going to be rejected, and you might lose some time of eligibility as a result.
Yeah, that's a big problem. So, Ed, let's turn to some common misunderstandings. I know that we talked about this when we were preparing for the program, and you had a lot to say about that. What are some of the common problems that arise, and also what are some of the common misunderstandings that arise in the course of of trying to pursue an application for Medicaid?
Well, I think we've talked about some of the two big ones. One is that we're not going to be able to use regular Medicaid to pay for assisted living care, so that's an issue. And then the other issue is the fact there really are different rules for a single individual as opposed to a couple, married couple. They're really separate creatures with regard to what are exempt, the planning that can be done, and all of those particular kinds of issues that follow it. So those are, I think, two major mistakes that people don't realize that they think. And for instance, the home, if there's a spouse or a disabled child living in the home, it's going to be an exempt asset. People frequently think they're going to have to give up the home. The spouse thinks they're going to have to suddenly lose their home. That's not true.
And that's important for people to know as well. Because people do come in and they think, I've got to give this thing away before my husband goes into the nursing home.
That's a misconception.
And
people need to know.
That just breeds further problems. So, there's a lot of stuff we've covered. There's a lot of stuff we couldn't get to because there's just so much to cover, and you guys did a great job, synthesizing your answers. But give me some of your final thoughts about things and points you really want to make, Angie, about this whole topic area as we sort of get into this area for our viewers.
I think it's important to look at the different techniques and strategies you can make. Proactive planning versus crisis planning. So when someone has a chronic illness, it's important to have the proper documents in place, such as your powers of attorney, so that if you are dealing with a spouse that isn't able to make their own decisions anymore, then you have the power to maybe transfer assets between each other to qualify for Medicaid. But you also have to remember that tax planning and estate planning can sometimes be an issue when it comes to Medicaid planning, because they don't all coincide together.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Ed, how about yourself? Some final thoughts you want to share with folks?
I think that Medicaid is a difficult enough process that you're going to need help. I don't think the rules are complex enough that somewhere down the line you're going to have to get somebody with competent experience to help you through understanding the rules and what can be done to preserve as much assets, particularly with a community spouse, that can be done. And in just going through the application process and what Medicaid is going to require. So I think also having responsible help, people that know what they're doing, is very important in this area.
Well, having listened to you folks, both in preparing for this as well as this program, I'm scared to death about a Medicaid application. I mean, you definitely need to have somebody who knows what they're doing. I want to thank both of you for taking the time to come and visit with us and share us, all that experience you've had. It's a great help and very informative, and our viewers very much appreciate it. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Richard.
having me.
You're very,
Thank
very
you.
welcome. Without a doubt, handling the finances for an aging adult can be challenging, and nothing can be more stressful than trying to figure out how to pay for long-term care needs, especially when your loved one has limited resources and no long-term care insurance. Virginia Adult Long-Term Care Medicaid is a resource that may solve this need. Virginia Medicaid rules are complicated. There are qualification rules to navigate, and the application process is not for the faint of heart. Do not despair, however, if the facts suggest your loved one will not qualify. There are, in fact, planning strategies that can be allow you to legally restructure the facts so she will qualify. And those strategies will be examined in detail in a series of future shows. But I repeat these words of caution. Whether you're trying to qualify your loved one for Medicaid coverage before a crisis presents itself, or you're trying to qualify for Medicaid during a crisis, be forewarned that Medicaid planning is not something that lends itself to do-it-yourself efforts, especially since mistakes leading to a denial of Medicaid coverage are often not curable for as long as 60 months. I strongly encourage you to get advice from a qualified Medicaid attorney early in your efforts to figure out ways to pay for the long-term care needs of your loved one. This brings us to the conclusion of our show. We hope you found it helpful. Replays of this show and all the shows broadcast to date, along with other helpful information, can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.